I am so over the MVP season this year. I think that's probably because it's really been a two-headed race for most of it between Embiid and Jokic. Obviously, there have been other contenders who've put their names in there, like Jayson Tatum and Giannis Antetokounmpo, with their own impressive seasons. But at the end of the day, I really think it is between Embiid and Jokic. And that being said, this is going to be my last statement on it, regardless of if the end result is not what I agree with. And my take is that I think, without a shadow of a doubt, Joel Embiid is the MVP this season. The MVP award every year has a lot of contractors, and I think that's fair. Almost every year someone says, oh, well, I think so-and-so should have won, or so-and-so. And I mean, there really is a lot of validity to that. It's just a panel of people who have their own biases and grudges, like their own teams, like certain players. So it's natural that human error is going to be a part of this. Now, that being said, Jokic's back-to-back MVPs, I think there's an okay argument for both of those. But for him to be a 3-time MVP with this season feels like the MVP criteria is conveniently shifting to whatever he needs to win. And the MVP criteria shifts all the time. I'm aware of that. But I don't want this year to be one that we look back on like 05-06. What happened in 05-06 was the notorious Nash over Kobe year. Nash averaging 18 and 10, beat Kobe averaging an absurd 35 points a game and carrying almost all of the Lakers' offensive load. Now, the reason Nash won it, I don't think anyone can be 100% for certain. Was it because Amari Stoudemire got injured and only played 3 games that season? Was it because they had the third best record in the West at 54 wins? Was it just because he was extremely efficient, even with his low numbers? There's no great reason or for sure answer as to why he won over a, in my opinion, more deserving LeBron James, Dirk Nowitzki, and what I say in Kobe Bryant. I mean, Kobe Bryant, this was a notorious rebuild year for the Lakers. If you want to make the argument for, okay, well, a depleted roster and bad teammates should have justified it, Kobe willing the Lakers team into the playoffs with a supporting cast of Kwame Brown and Bynum, Lamar Odom, Smush Parker, I think that's more than an argument. But again, the storyline went with Nash. His efficiency as well as storyline, for whatever reason, gave him the edge over a soon-to-be 2 finals contenders in LeBron and Dirk, who would make the finals that year, and Kobe Bryant, who, as I said, brought a Lakers roster to the playoffs that had next to no business being there. In Jokic's case, 2 years ago, he led the Nuggets to a 3 seed with a 26, 10, and 8 stat line. And it was all about how he carried this team to the 3 seed and, that he really is just a diamond in the rough on this team, right? And then last year, it was about his triple-double. And they just kind of conveniently leave out that they were the 6th seed and, struggled to even make the playoffs with very little success in either of those years in the playoffs in terms of making the finals. So this year, if he wins, it would obviously be because he's a 1 seed, but he's averaging a not as impressive triple-double as the year prior. A bad supporting cast, I think, can only be the reason and a extra step of justification for why you would win MVP so many times before. It's just like, is it really a bad supporting cast if you're consistently making the playoffs? I just think, again, of like the LeBron years when he first got drafted by Cleveland. If you got an MVP for being on a bad team and putting up good numbers and making the playoffs, LeBron should have won it pretty much every year. The dude is 20 years old, averaging 27 points on a terrible Cleveland team. And a lot of the reason he had all those opportunities is because there wasn't talent around him, so his numbers were inflated. Very, Russell Westbrook in 2016 or, a lot of the James Harden Rockets teams. But they didn't get the same love that Nikolai Jokic, of all people, is getting. To be an MVP, I think there's 2 aspects that I think are important and I think you can almost see every year, and that is dominance and showmanship, or more of like a story, right? I think famous examples are like the year Steph broke the 3 record, shooting 400 in a season, and he won the MVP. And a lot of that was because storyline as well as being on a great team, but the storyline really sold it that year as well as the dominance. He kind of hit 2 of what I think are the most important factors. And again, that Steve Nash year, he was incredibly efficient on a team that was the 1 seed, and somehow that won. I think the story really helped him there. People were big on Nash that year, and he'd just done really well the year prior, so it just I think it kind of fed into everything. So regarding this dominance and showmanship or storyline that I'm talking about, I don't think Jokic has either of these this year. Meanwhile, Embiid has them both. Joel Embiid openly embraces the role of a villain, which the NBA needs, averaging 33 a game, which only 3 centers have ever done. Wilt Chamberlain, Bob McAdoo, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. 3 Hall of Famers, 2 of the unanimously greatest big men of all time. and guys who did it in an era where centers were the featured part of an offense. Joel Embiid is so good, he's kind of rewriting the narrative of that you can't win games by having a center score the bulk of your points. His usage rate is a disgusting 37%. The only MVP to have more was Russell Westbrook in 2016, where he had a 41% usage rate. So again, what I think is one of the more impressive MVP seasons ever in Russell Westbrook's, Joel Embiid's, I think, is more than fair to say it's comparable. So if you want to make then the argument that Joel Embiid has the better team, I think that's fair. Really talented roster, but I think they both do. Regardless, what does it matter how good his team is when he's almost getting the ball 50% of times? Doesn't that show that even the guys on his roster, these talented guys, realize how good he is to just keep giving him opportunities? Even though if they were so amazing and, all these guys that, demanded the ball and, just a star-studded roster, wouldn't you think they would want a little more share of a ball and not letting one guy almost have 40% of the offensive load? Now, again, I understand they're winning, but my point here just is that he's sharing such a heavy part of the offense. It truly has only ever been seen before a few times, and never by a center. So, Joel Embiid's getting the ball around 40% of the time. But does that mean you can stop him? Nope. No one can. Meanwhile, Jokic is only at 27% usage rate, which would be the lowest of his MVP seasons, as well as pretty low overall. The lowest ever usage rate of an MVP was around 20%. So he's more in that ballpark than Joel Embiid's 37%. Joel Embiid's second best of all time. Nikolai Jokic is in the bottom fifth, just to give some perspective. So I think this then raises the argument. He's on the best team, but he's touching the ball substantially less than Joel Embiid, which raises the argument that couldn't you say Joel Embiid is more needed for his team's success and proficiency in running the offense than Jokic, who seems to let his guys carry more of the burden? Now, one of the main arguments I see for Jokic is, to me, I think one of the weaker ones. And it's all these advanced analytics nerds who are all about Jokic because of his, his VORP, his value over his replacement, or his offensive and defensive plus or minuses. And I think that's fair. Again, I think advanced stats have a place in basketball. But I think for whatever reason, again, the criteria is shifting. Jokic, because his are good, all of the emphasis seems to be being placed on these. These, again, impressive advanced analytics numbers, but they're, again, the lowest of his MVP seasons. So how do you justify giving him the MVP over Embiid when this is the, statistically speaking, per advanced analytics, worst of his last 3 seasons? And, again, the 27% usage rate is a crazy thing to me. No guy shooting the ball 14 times a game, to me, is the MVP. That is just such an absurdly low amount of times to be shooting the ball if you truly think you are the most valuable player on your team, let alone the whole league. And I get that everyone's value is expressed differently, but still, that's absurd to me. Nikola Jokic is only shooting the ball 14 times a game. Meanwhile, Joel Embiid is shooting it over 20 times a game, while he's double-teamed on average around 35% of possessions he's on the court. And he's still scoring, and he's the only center in the top 20 of players being double-teamed in the NBA. So there are so many advanced stats you could bring up that could frame Joel as the winner, and that's just why I kind of don't give as much credence to them as other stats. And then what I think is the most damning piece of evidence is the matchup this year. They're very close, I'll admit that, okay? Even though I think Joel's the MVP, I admit it's a close race. That being said, let's go to their matchup, right? They had one head-to-head matchup this year, and if it's this close, I think you really have to look about how they play against each other since they play the same position, so their impact could be comparable. Sixers only had one more win, so again, very similar seasons, and Jokic only played a few more games than Embiid. So let's look at what Jokic did against Embiid this year. So Nikolai Jokic, who again is having the 5th best season per defensive box score plus or minus of all time. Let's see what he allowed Joel Embiid to hang up on him. 47 points, 18 rebounds, 5 assists, 3 steals, 2 blocks, the game winner, and all the while having a plus 14 box score that game. Again, versus a guy who was having a top 10 defensive season of all time, top 5 defensive season of all time. Stop playing with me. Joel Embiid is the MVP all the way. So let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Obviously, I understand it's going to be a very close race regardless, but still, just thought I would raise my side of the argument, which is the right side. So let me know down in the comments below what you think. Do you think Jokic is the MVP? Do you think I'm crazy for saying all these things? Do you think Giannis is MVP? As well as be sure to like and subscribe. I'm also, as per usual, going to link my podcast in the description down below, and feel free to check that out. We'd really appreciate it. And I'll see you guys next time. Later.